Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tado Jayam Udiraye. Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimadi Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, we are continuing to read from Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, second chapter, verses 14 onwards. So, we have been continuing for past like 2 weeks on Srimad Bhagavatam. His Grace Harivilas Prabhu started. In the end of December, he started on Srimad Bhagavatam. So, he have been covering the first canto over the past few days. And then he is not here in town, so on behalf of him we are continuing. Today His Grace Amirdhananda Prabhu is supposed to continue, but unfortunately he had some emergency, he couldn't come. And so I am trying to fill his shoes. So please forgive for any of my inability to explain some of these verses properly. So yesterday His Grace Vedanayan Prabhu was explaining about the Lord in the heart. So he was giving the overview of the Srimad Bhagavatam, in what context Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken, and then why these verses have been repeated here in this place. The second canto, second chapter, Lord in the Heart, that's the title of the chapter. So, and especially the 13th verse he was reciting. So I'm going to read that 13th verse for a continuity, and then we will be continuing on the next verse. The process of meditation should begin from the lotus feet of the Lord and progress to his smiling face. Meditation should be concentrated upon the lotus feet, then the calves, then the thighs, and in this way higher and higher. More the mind becomes fixed upon the different parts of the limbs, one after another, the more intelligence becomes purified. So 14th verse. Unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. So purport: the Supreme Lord is the seer of all worlds, both material and transcendental. In other words, the Supreme Lord is the ultimate beneficiary and enjoyer of all the worlds, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, 5th chapter, 29th verse. So here in this verse, it is mentioned, the previous verse tells the process of meditation. A devotee who wants to meditate on the Supreme Lord, or a yogi who wants to meditate, he should meditate on the Paramatma in the heart. So the form of meditation is very clearly explained. The previous verses very clearly described that form of the Lord, the four-handed form of the Lord, Lord Janardana. So having Gada and Shankha, Chakra and Padma. Shankha, Chakra, Gada, Padma. He has four things, four paraphernalia in his hand. The lotus, the conch, the disc weapon, and then the Gada weapon. So the mace. So these four things he is holding in his hand So this four-handed form, specifically, so starting from the lower right hand, it's mentioned, depending on the position of this paraphernalia he is holding, he is called with different names. This particular position it is described is like called Janardana form. So yogi should meditate on the Lord in the heart, in the Paramatma form, which is this four-handed form. So, for example, if somebody is not purified enough, he will not be able to reach that Samadhi state. Until somebody comes to the Samadhi state, in the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 steps of yoga is described. So the final stage of the yoga, the mechanical process of yoga, is the Samadhi state. Until somebody comes to the Samadhi state, actually focusing his mind and removing all the unwanted things from his heart, he will not be able to see the Paramatma in his heart. Hence, when somebody is not in that stage, for the devotee, out of mercy, the Lord incarnates in the Archavigraha form. So, because we are not able to see the Lord in our heart in the Paramatma form, out of kindness to help the devotee, the Lord comes in the Archavigraha form. And Archavigraha form is considered to be the most merciful form. Yesterday Prabhu was explaining, the Archavigraha form is non-different than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even though apparently it is made up of material elements, sometimes the deity might be made up on marble or stone or like metal, sometimes it's on cloth, sometimes on painting. Even though it's different forms, actually it is non-different than the Supreme Lord Himself. There is no difference between the Lord in the personal form who is in the spiritual world and the Lord standing here in the Archavigraha form. There is no difference at all, because He is one and the same. The Prabhu was giving the example, right, that even if you take an iron rod, right, it is not fire. Iron rod is separate from fire. But if you keep the iron rod in the fire continuously over the period of time, it becomes fire, right? Similarly, even though we don't have that purity, by worshipping the Lord in the Archavigraha form, even though we don't have the purity in the heart, even though we don't have the spiritual vision to see the Lord, when we worship this Archavigraha form, our contamination gets cleared up, our contaminants goes away, and then we will be able to see that actually this form is non-different than the form who is in the spiritual world in Golaka. So this is one example all the time I used to give, this example. How can you say that this is non-different than Krishna who is in the spiritual world? And then also sometimes people say that the Lord is, you are saying that the Lord is in super soul, the Paramatma form, He is there everywhere. He is there in every atom, also in every space between the atoms. Paramatma, Vishnu means all pervading. He is there everywhere. So He is there everywhere in everyone's heart, as well as in every atom, as well as the space between the atoms. If that is the case, why do you have to worship the Archavigraha form? People say. The example I all the time give is, even though it is there everywhere, we can't see. For example, so our NBC television, right, is like transmitting the program everywhere. It is there in this room, everywhere. Local television, right, NBC, King 5 is transmitting the NBC television program. It is there in this room everywhere, right? The electromagnetic waves is there in this room everywhere. Can we see it? No, right? In order to see that program, in order to perceive that NBC television, what do you need? You need a television set. And then, after having a television set, what do you need to have? You need to tune that television set to a particular frequency. So when you tune to that particular frequency, then you can watch the television show. Now, let's say the president of the country, Barack Obama, is giving address to the nation, State of the Union address. Every year he gives the State of the Union address. So he is speaking from the White House. He is sitting in the White House and speaking. And then NBC television carries this recording, right? From the White House, they set up a camera, they transmit this program to their base station in Washington DC. From there, they upload to satellite. From satellite, it comes to Seattle, King 5 television. From King 5 television, transmits to all around Seattle. If I have a TV set, if I have a television, if I tune to that frequency, King 5 frequency, channel 5, I can see Barack Obama. Is there any difference between seeing Barack Obama when he is speaking in White House and seeing here? No. It is as good as I sitting in White House and listening to Barack Obama. There is no difference. As long as NBC without in between is not modifying anything. As long as NBC uploads the program from White House to their base station, from there it goes to satellite, from satellite it comes to King 5, from King 5 it comes to my television. As long as I tune to that King 5 television channel frequency, my television set, it is non-different than seeing Barack Obama in the White House. It is as good as I sitting in the White House. Actually, in order to go to the White House, is it easy? For anybody it is easy to go to the White House? No. Right? In order to enter into the White House, you need to get security clearance. There is so much of background check they will do. Where and all country you have traveled, what's your record, what's your criminal record, what's your tax record, everything they will check. Without qualification, one cannot easily enter into the White House. Whereas, watching Barack Obama, right, through television, anybody can see it, even though they don't have qualification. The only thing required is they need to tune that television set to that particular frequency. Then they can see. This is out of kindness. Even though not everybody cannot go to the White House, out of kindness, NBC television makes this arrangement for the common people to access the president. Similarly, the acharyas, out of kindness, the Lord out of kindness comes into the form of Archavigraha form. The acharyas out of kindness for the general mass of people, they establish the deity form in the temple with proper worship based on the Shastra. Shastra very clearly tells, the scriptures very clearly tells how to establish the deity form of the Lord. What is the bona fide method of worshipping the deity form of the Lord? That is based on scriptures, the acharyas, that is the mercy of the acharya. He kindly establishes a temple so that the common mass of people can get benefit. In order to perceive the Lord Shri Krishna in this Archavigraha form, what is required? We need to tune the frequency of our heart. If we can tune the frequency of our heart according to the instructions of the bona fide spiritual master and the scriptures, we will be able to see Lord in this form. Well, how do you see? Not through our eyes, material eyes. We have to learn to see through the ears. We have to learn to see through the ears. That is, means Shastra Shakshu. Learning to see through the eyes of the scriptures. When we can see that, you will be able to see the Lord Shri Krishna standing here in this Archavigraha form is non-different than the Lord in the spiritual world. So that is out of His mercy He comes. Here in this verse, it is mentioned, if somebody is very materially attached, right? If somebody is very materially attached, he cannot meditate on the Lord in the Paramatma form. It is not possible. If somebody is not purified enough, that person, the recommended method for a yogi. For a yogi, the recommended method here is one should meditate on the universal form of the Lord. Universal form of the Lord actually is previously described, or further the description is coming, right? That like the Lord, the sun and moon is considered to be the eyes, right? The whole, the rivers are considered to be His veins. Different things in the nature can be perceived. It's an imaginary form. For a materialistic person, that is the method recommended. Whereas for a devotee who have taken up the devotional service, the devotional path, the Lord out of kindness, He manifests in the Archavigraha form. So it becomes very easy. To conceive this universal form, it becomes very difficult, the process. Whereas in the Bhakti Yoga, the process of Bhakti Yoga, the process of devotional service, it is very easy through Archavigraha worship. So that is why it is recommended, the Acharyas they establish a temple. And Acharyas establish the temple so that we can worship the Lord in the Archavigraha form. So that is what here is explained. And then further, Prabhupada actually explains in the purport, the Supreme Lord, actually He is the controller, He is the seer of all worlds, both material and spiritual. And then also He is giving cross-reference from Bhagavad Gita, 5th chapter, 29th verse. Bhoktaram yajyatapasam, sarvaloka mageshwaram, sugurdam sarva bhutanam, nyatvam mam santim richyate. Here actually Krishna in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, He tells that I am the controller of all the planets you see, and I am the well-wisher of all the living entities, and I am the owner, proprietor of all the things we see. The one who understands this, right, actually he can get relief from the material sufferings. Until one comes to this level of that the Lord, the Supreme Lord is the owner and proprietor and controller of all the things which exist, one is not possible to attain peace. Once he understands that the Lord is the controller and proprietor and the well-wisher of all living entities, he will not have any lamentation anymore. He will not actually see that, he will not think that I am the controller. As long as somebody thinks that I am the controller and I am the proprietor and I am the enjoyer, one cannot be peaceful. Because we all know that even by practical in our life, whatever we possess, right, I can possess a car, or I can possess my bank balance, or I can possess a house, I can possess whatever, in this possession in this world, whatever I possess, it is matter of time. It will be taken away from me over a period of time. The time comes, time in the form of death. If nothing, nobody else is taking away, time in the form of death will come and take it out. So when something is taken away from me, I will be suffering. If I think that it's mine, if somebody forcefully takes away, how painful it will be. It will be very painful. That is why mentioned in the scriptures, in the, which Purana, about the death, painful of another death, it's in the Garuda Purana. In the Garuda Purana mentioned, the death is like, it's a very painful event. How painful it is? It is like 40,000 scorpions biting at the same time. Why do you think the death is so painful? Because when people are attached, when we are attached to the material possession, right, when it is on that one moment, everything is forcefully taken away, it is very painful. For example, if somebody comes and cuts my finger away, taken away, my little finger, tip of my finger. If I do, let's assume that I am doing some work in a machine, the hand is cut. Right? How painful it is to lose something you possess. Even somebody is very painful, even the little bit of nail they lose, it becomes very painful. How difficult it will be at all of a sudden, the entire body and all the possessions is simultaneously taken away at that moment. It will be very painful. That's why scripture says death is a very painful event. So here it is mentioned that until somebody understands that the Lord is the supreme controller, supreme proprietor and well-wisher of all the living entities, he will not be able to attain peace. That's what Krishna tells in Bhagavad Gita, 5th chapter, 29th verse. It's a very important verse. And then further Prabhupada explains in the purport, the spiritual world is the manifestation of his internal potency and the material world is the manifestation of his external potency. The living entities are also his marginal potency. By their choice, they can live in either the transcendental or material worlds. The material world is not a fit place for living entities because they are spiritually one with the Lord, and in the material world, the living entities become conditioned by the laws of the material world. Here again, the Lord's different energies are mentioned. In the Vishnu Purana, it is mentioned the Lord has so many types of energy. Among them, there are three energies of the Lord is very prominent. Three categories of energy. First is called Antaranga Shakti, the Lord's internal potency. The next is called Bhagiranga Shakti, the Lord's external potency. And then Tadasya Shakti, the Lord's marginal energy. The whole spiritual world, all the Vaikuntha planets and all the activities and paraphernalia in the spiritual world is made up of Antaranga Shakti, the Lord's internal potency. And what we see in this material world, all the matter, which is nothing but the nature of the matter is Asat, Achit, Nirananda. It is all made up of Lord's Bhagiranga Shakti, external potency. The Lord's energy in the spiritual world is called Yoga Maya, Sat, Chit, Ananda. That energy, the spiritual energy is Sat, Chit, Ananda, which is Yoga Maya. Whereas the energy in the material world is Asat, Achit, Nirananda, which is Mahamaya. And then apart from this two energy, the Lord also has a third type of energy. That is called Tadasya Shakti, marginal energy. That the living entity, the Jivatma, are all made up of this Tadasya Shakti. Even though Jiva is also spirit. It is spirit, the same as internal potency of the Lord, but it is minute, it is marginal. Marginal means either it can be with the internal potency, internal energy, or it can be with external potency. It is like this. If you go to the ocean shore, right, in the beach, so there is a border where the ocean ends and the land begins. You see what I'm saying? So in the beach, there is a part of the sand which is either, sometimes it can be within the ocean. When the high tide comes, it gets covered up by the ocean. It is part of the ocean. When the high tide recedes, the waves recede, right? That becomes part of the land. It is like that land with the marginal land, which is in the edge of the ocean and the land, mainland, that is a marginal land. Like that, the living entities, the Jivatma, are marginal. Either we can be with the Lord in the spiritual world, that is like Antaranga Shakti, or we can be in this material world, which is made up of Bahiranga Shakti. When the living entity is with the Lord in the spiritual world, it is Sat Chit Ananda. It enjoys bliss. It experiences bliss in association of the Lord. When the same living entity rebels against the Supreme Personality of Godhead and wanted to be independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, when it comes to the material world, it associates with Bahiranga Shakti, external energy, which is the nature of the Bahiranga Shakti is Asat, Achit, Nirananda. Asat means temporary. Achit means it is not conscious, it is dull, inert. And Nirananda means it doesn't provide any bliss, it only provides suffering. Whereas Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat means eternal, Chit means conscious, and Ananda means full of bliss. That is spiritual energy. The nature of the living entity is also Sat, Chit, Ananda. That Sat, Chit, Ananda Jivatma, when it associates with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the spiritual world, it realizes the nature, Sat, Chit, Ananda, and experiences bliss. When it comes to the material world, even though the living entity is made up of Sat, Chit, Ananda, but the living entity is covered by the false ego to think that I am this body. When the living entity comes to the material world, it cannot actually enjoy independent of the Lord. Hence the Lord gives a kind of a covering for the living entity so that it can try to enjoy independently. That covering is called false ego, Akankar. That is the first covering of the living entity. When the Jivatma comes into the material world, the first covering for the living entity is called Akankar, false ego. The next covering is called Buddhi, intelligence. And the next covering on top of it is called mind, Manas. On top of it is our gross body, which is made up of earth, water, fire, air and space. Bhumi, Rapo, Analo, Vayu, Kam. These 5 elements. On top of it, the living entity has a subtle body which is made up of the 3 elements. That is mind, intelligence and Ahankar. Mana, Buddhi and Ahankar. False ego. So the living entity actually is, the Jivatma is Sat, Chit, Ananda. That Sat, Chit, Ananda marginal living entity, when it comes into the material world, what is the purpose of the material world? This living entity is rebelled against the Lord in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, the living entity is serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead out of love and devotion. Out of love it was serving. But that living entity, when it wanted to exercise the free will, when it misused the free will to enjoy independent of the Lord, it is sent to the material world. But by nature, the living entity can never enjoy independent of the Lord. Hence, out of kindness, because we had a desire to enjoy independent of the Lord, out of kindness, the Lord covers the living entity with this Ahankar, the facility he gives. Ahankar. Ahankar, what is the purpose of Ahankar? Ahankar does only one thing. It makes us to think that I am this body. False ego makes us to think that I am this body. And I am this body, and everything I see is connected to my body, and everything is for my enjoyment. And I am the controller of all the things I see, and everything is there for my enjoyment. That is what false ego does. And mind actually is nothing but a storehouse of all the events happening to us. And intelligence is the one which discriminates between right and wrong. And on top of it, we have a gross body, which is made up of these 5 gross elements. Until one understands that I am not this body, I am not this mind, I am not the intelligence, I am not the false ego, I am the spirit soul. Aham Brahmasmi. I am spirit soul. I am Satchit Ananda. My purpose is to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. What is the purpose of the part? Purpose of the part is to serve the whole. Purpose of the hand is to serve the body. Like that, the Jivatma's purpose is to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Until one comes to that stage, until one understands the Lord is the Supreme Personality, he is the controller, proprietor and enjoyer of everything, one cannot be peaceful, one cannot be happy. That's what Prabhupada is explaining in the purport. Further here, when the living entity comes to the material world, it is conditioned by the laws of material nature. What is the laws of material nature? For every action, there is a consequent reaction. When we try to enjoy independent of the Lord, right, we are actually under strict laws of the nature. Why? Why that laws of nature? Why I cannot enjoy infinitely in this material world? Because I am not the only one who come into the material world to enjoy. Like me, there are so many other living entities which rebelled against the Lord. They have also come into this material world. So that means, when I try to enjoy independently, I have a person next to me sitting there. I will be interfering that person's free will. So it is not possible. Hence, the laws of nature have been created by the Lord and given certain limited freedom. Within that limited freedom, within that laws of nature, when I try to enjoy, I can experience little bit of pleasure. When I try to violate that laws of nature, when I try to violate others' free will, then I come under the strict, stringent laws of material nature, then I have to suffer. And most of the time, the living entity in the material world, what is it going through? It is going through simply suffering. Because Krishna tells in Bhagavad Gita, this material world is nothing but dukkhalayam ashashvatam. Dukkha alayam. Alayam means place. Dukkha means misery. This material world is nothing but a place of misery. And not only that, if somebody says, I don't see misery, I am happy. Somebody can claim, I am happy. I don't accept this statement that this place is place of misery. I feel enjoyment. That's why the Lord, next statement, he says, it is temporary. If somebody is saying that I am happy, just wait. It matter of time, your happiness will disappear. Misery will automatically come. That is what mentioned. Happiness in this material world is like gap between two misery. The happiness material in this material world is actually very, very flickering and very insignificant. It is like when somebody is in the desert. When somebody is in the desert, he is like drowning. He is like actually he is having unquenchable thirst. When somebody is very thirsty in the desert, if you give a drop of water to that person, will he quenched by the thirst? No. In fact, actually somebody puts a drop of water in the tongue of that person, it will agitate the thirst more. Like that, the material happiness in this world actually is never satisfying. Whenever somebody tries to enjoy material energy in this world, materially, through sense gratification, that does not satisfy that person at all, satisfy the desire. Actually, in fact, it increases. It is like adding fuel to the fire. If there is a fire going on, if I take 1 gallon of petrol, gas, and put it in the fire, thinking that the fire will come down, do you think the fire is going to come down? I can think that, see, this gasoline looks like liquid, it looks like water. I can take it and throw it on this fire, thinking that the fire will come down. Do you think the fire is going to come down? No. It will actually increase the fire. Similarly, when the conditioned living entities try to enjoy material energy, try to lord over this material energy, try to gratify their senses, it never gets satisfied. In fact, it increases more and more. So that is the nature of the pleasure in this world. Until when somebody realizes that this is a never-ending process, I have taken millions and millions of birth. All the enjoyment I had gone through all the different species of life. There are 8.4 million types of living entities are there to enjoy pleasure in different forms. For example, if I want to sleep all the time, there is a body available to sleep. 6 months, a year, a bare body. If I want to eat all junk, anything untouchable, then there is a pig's body. If I want to stand naked all the time, there is a tree's body. Right? If I wanted to eat other animals, then there is a tiger or a lion's body. Like that, the mother nature is providing different types of body for the living entity. Try to enjoy the pleasure in this material world. But none of them satisfies the living entity, because the nature of pleasure in this material world is never satiating. Because the nature of the material energy is asat, achit, nirananda, whereas the living entity is sat, chit, ananda. There is incompatibility. There is incompatibility. The nature, the spirit, the soul is spirit, the jivatma is spirit, whereas the material world is made up of matter. There is incompatibility. The living entity is supposed to be in spiritual world. Spirit belongs to spiritual world. Matter only belongs to the material world. But that living entity comes in contact with material energy, it goes through suffering under the laws of nature, under the stringent laws of nature. The laws of nature is never forgiving. They say nature is cruel. They say, there is a statement, right? Nature is cruel. Is unforgiving. One can escape the laws of the state by having a good lawyer. Right? Arivilas Prabhu was giving that example, O.J. Simpson example. Because he had an extremely good lawyer, he got away with the murder. But whereas the laws of nature is extremely fine, and for sure it will act. The laws of God, the mills of God is fine and sure. It will grind it finely. Whatever mistake we make, the consequent reaction one has to face. There is no escape from that laws of nature. It's very stringent. It's unforgiving. That is why Krishna says in the 7th chapter, Daivigiyesha gunamai mamamaya duratyaya. This divine energy of mine, this material energy also my divine energy only, it is very difficult to overcome. It is very difficult to overcome. Duratyaya. Duratyaya means very difficult to overcome. The only way to overcome this material energy is Mam evaye prapadyante. To me alone, when somebody surrenders, prapati means surrender. When somebody surrenders to me alone, then he can overcome this material energy. How? When a devotee surrenders to the Supreme Lord, this material ocean, the existence of material energy becomes shrunken. If you want to cross this ocean, it is possible for anybody to swim across this ocean and cross. For anybody is it possible to cross the ocean. Even if you take an expert swimmer, throw him in Pacific Ocean, do you think he will be able to cross? No. He can maybe swim for like 10 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles, right? After that the waves will toss him and turn him. Even an expert swimmer cannot cross the ocean. It is not possible. The material energy is like that, this material ocean, which is impossible to cross. When a devotee surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that ocean, it gets shrunken. How much it gets shrunken? Like if there is a calf. The calf has a very small leg. The hoof print of a calf is like this much size, like almost like a palm size. If we shrunk the whole ocean and put the water into in this hoof print, calf's hoof print, how much water it will be? So less. That is very easy to cross. Like that, this material energy is very difficult to overcome when a devotee surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, as he says in Bhagavad Gita, Mam evaye prapadyante, maya metam tarantite. It is very easy to cross over for somebody who surrenders. What is the surrendering process? In devotional service is the right method. That's what Srimad Bhagavatam tells. These 9 limbs of devotional service, starting with Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padanam, right? Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Atma Nivedanam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. So Prahlad Maharaj is telling in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we will come from that later, there are 9 types of devotional service one can render. The beginning, the most important form of devotional service, and that is Shravanam and Kirtanam. Shravanam means first hearing the glories of the Lord. Then one might ask the question, why it is important? Why I cannot directly worship, do Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam? Why should I hear first? Because the reason why we had come into this material world is because out of jealousy or envy out of the Lord. That's why we had revolted against Him. Why He is always the enjoyer? Why He is always the controller? Why everything is working for His pleasure? Why not for me? That root cause for the fall down of the living entity from the spiritual world into this material world is the root cause. That I wanted to be the enjoyer instead of Krishna. That envy is the root cause which brought us the living entity to the material world. And what is the solution to envy? Forget about spiritual world, our envy towards Krishna. Let's say I am envious of my friend or my neighbor. How do you get rid of envy? As far as I have seen, analyzed, nowhere I had seen so. Even all religions actually propagate that you should not envy. All religion tells you that we should get rid of envy. But none of them actually tells the solution. If I have an envious feeling towards my neighbor, once I get it, once I have envious feeling, how do I get rid of it? Except Srimad Bhagavatam, I have not seen the solution anywhere. Srimad Bhagavatam tells, if you first hear the glories of the person, if I am envious of somebody, how do I get rid of the envy? First I need to hear the glories, the good qualities of the person. If somebody explains the good qualities of the person, when I repeatedly, I also glorify that person. Even though I have the envy, if I repeatedly keep hearing about that person's good qualities, and then I also start repeating that person's good qualities, automatically the envy will come down. At some point of time, we will realize that actually, in fact, this person is a good person. Similarly, if you want to get rid of our original envy towards the Lord, what is the process? Shravanam. Especially, one has to hear from a pure devotee. Srila Prabhupada. That's what he had done. In Srimad Bhagavatam and Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada had presented the message as it is. When we hear from a pure devotee the glories of the Lord, our heart will change. When we hear and then when we repeat those glories ourselves, our heart gets cleansed. When our heart is cleansed, then our pure love for the Lord will happen, and then we can remember the Lord all the time. Then we can do worship the deity form Archanam, and then we can offer prayers Vandanam, and then we can make friendship with the Lord. We can become a servant of the Lord. All the other things, other forms of the devotional service will develop. That's why Shravanam and Kirtanam is the most important form. Actually, as here mentioned in this verse, if there is a gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, unless somebody comes to this loving service, if somebody is a materialistic person, whoever in this material world, they are all materialistic. If somebody until develops a loving service, it is not possible. One has to go through the difficult process of meditating on the universal form of the Lord. By developing, even though we may not have love, pure love for the Lord in the beginning, when we follow the instructions of bona fide spiritual masters, when we follow the instructions of a pure devotee, our love for the Lord gets developed. It's like this. In the beginning, we may not have a love. But when we practice the sadhana bhakti, according to the rules and regulations prescribed in the scriptures, starting with Shravanam and Kirtanam, slowly the heart will transform. With the unwanted things from the heart will get purified. That is the process of bhakti. Further, Prabhupada is explaining, the material world is not a fit place for the living entities, because they are spiritually one with the Lord, and in the material world, the living entities become conditioned by the laws of the material world. The material world is not a fit place, That's what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada, he mentioned this material world is not a place for gentlemen. This is, you cannot be happy, one cannot be, this is not a place for gentlemen and ladies. Ladies and gentlemen cannot live here. Gentleman means what? One who is honest. One cannot be honest in this material world. Because the material nature, even if you are trying to be honest, somebody else will come and destroy your honesty. Right? There are three types of misery. Everybody has to go through. What are three types of misery? Adya Atmika Klesha. Every living entity has to go through these three types of misery. Adya Atmika Klesha. Klesha means misery. Adya Atmika means misery is caused by one's own mind and body. Everybody has to go through this misery. Misery is caused by one's own mind and body. Let's assume that my body and mind is, to an extent, it's stable. I am not going through any misery. The next type of misery will act on you. Adi Baudhika Klesha. Misery is caused by other living entities. Example, mosquitoes, terrorists, in-laws, manager in the office. Right? One has to go, if my body and mind is okay, somebody else will cause you misery. On top of it, beyond this, there is a third type of misery. Adi Daivika Klesha. Misery is caused by laws of nature. The nature itself causes calamities in the form of tsunami, right? In the form of earthquake, in the form of forest fire, in the form of extreme weather, cold weather, hot weather. So one can never overcome the three types of misery. One is always under these three types of misery. So who is as I mentioned before, this material world is like a prison house. This material world is like a prison house for the rebellious living entity who revolted against the Lord. Why the prison? What is the purpose of prison house? Is to correct somebody. Right? This place is like a correction place. And every jail, right, has a superintendent. Like that, this material world also has a superintendent. Who is the superintendent of the material world? This material world, the word, you know what is called Durg? You know what is the meaning of Durg? Durg means fort. Very difficult to get in or difficult to get out. The one who guards this material world, which is very difficult to get in and get out, is called Durga. The one who controls the material world, the superintendent of this material world, is called Durga. The one who controls this material world. She is the superintendent. What is the weapon she possesses? The Trishul. The Trishul represents the three types of miseries the living entity has to go through. You can see, right? Durga Mata standing on this Rakshasa, demon. And then, like prodding the demon with her Trishul. Like that, what is demon? Demon means one who goes against the will of the Lord. That's what demon is. Demon means not like one who has like horns and who has like long teeth. Generally we all have an opinion that demon means one who have like horns and long teeth and like very scary body. No. Actually, demons sometimes look very beautiful with nice blue eyes, nice blonde hair, all of them. Demon means one who is in his thoughts, who is in attitude, does not want to obey the laws of God. One does not want to, the injunctions mentioned in the scripture, he is called a demon. The one who revolts against the Lord is called demon. In that sense, almost everybody in this material world actually belongs to this demonic category only. It's a very fortunate thing. Sometimes out of the costless mercy, the Lord sends his pure devotee to give the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, so that the conditioned living entity which is suffering in this material world can be recovered back into the spiritual world. So we'll continue to read. The Lord wants all living entities who are his part and parcels to live with him in the transcendental world. And for enlightening conditioned souls in the material world, all the Vedas and the revealed scriptures are there, expressly to recall the conditioned souls back to home, back to Godhead. Unfortunately, the conditioned living entities, although suffering continually the threefold miseries of conditioned life, are not very serious about going back to Godhead. It is due to their misguided way of living, complicated by sins and virtues. Some of them who are virtuous by deeds begin to re-establish the lost relationship with the Lord, but they are unable to understand the personal future of the Lord. The real purpose of life is to make contact with the Lord and be engaged in His service. That is the natural position of the living entities. But those who are impersonalists are unable to render any loving service to the Lord, have been advised to meditate upon this impersonal feature, the Virat Rupa or universal form. Some way or the other, one must try to establish one's forgotten relation with the Lord if one at all desires to gain real happiness in life and to reclaim his natural unfettered condition. For the less intelligent beginners, the meditation on the impersonal form, the Virat Rupa or universal form of the Lord, will gradually qualify one to rise to personal contact. One is advised herewith to meditate upon the Virat Rupa specified in the previous chapters in order to understand how the different planets, seas, mountains, rivers, birds, beasts, human beings, demigods and all that we can conceive are but different part and limbs of the Lord's Virat form. Here the two process to get out of this material world is given. For a person who is little bit receptive for the message of the Lord, right? For that person, devotional service is available. Somebody has little propensity to appreciate the message of Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, that person easily can take up devotional service. He doesn't have to go through this difficult process of meditating on the impersonal form. If somebody is not ready, if somebody is not pure enough, somebody is not in that level to accept the personal form of the Lord, somebody is not in the level to appreciate the devotional service unto the Lord, for that person the process mentioned is the difficult process, that is meditating on the universal form of the Lord. This sort of thinking is also a type of meditation, right? Thinking of how all this existence, the living entities, mountains, rivers, the land, right, all the devatas, all are nothing but actually part of the Lord's existence. When somebody try to imagine in that particular form, actually it is also a type of meditation. So this sort of thinking is also a type of meditation on the absolute truth. And as soon as such meditation begins, one develops one's godly qualities and whole world appears to be happy and peaceful residence for all the people of the world. Without such meditation on God, either personal or impersonal, all good qualities of the human being become covered with misconceptions regarding his constitutional position. And without such advanced knowledge, the whole world becomes a hell for the human being. So here Prabhupada is explaining, one doesn't have to die to experience hellish condition. One doesn't have to die and go to hellish planets to experience hellish condition. If somebody doesn't have proper conception of life, one will experience hellish conditions in this world itself. One doesn't have to die to experience hellish condition. If one doesn't have proper conception on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he will experience hellish condition in this world itself, in this life itself. Similarly, one doesn't have to die to experience spiritual world. When somebody sincerely surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and follows the process of devotional service and gets rid of his attachment to the material thing, develops pure devotional service unto the Lord, in this world itself one can be liberated, Jivan Mukta. One becomes the servant of the Supreme Lord, right? Iha yasya harer dashya. When one executes all these activities in connection to the Supreme Lord as a devotional service, actually he is called Jivan Mukta. He is already a liberated soul. One doesn't have to die in order to experience the spiritual world and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just by readjusting his consciousness, just resetting his attitude little bit in a positive way towards the Lord by doing whatever prescribed duties we all have, still we can experience the absolute form of the Lord. That's what Prabhupada is mentioning here. So, in the next verse we will read the 14th verse. O king, whenever the yogi desires to leave this planet of human beings, he should not be perplexed about the proper time or place, but should comfortably sit without being disturbed and regulate the life air, should control the senses by the mind. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita, 8th chapter, 14th verse, it is clearly stated that a person who is totally engaged in transcendental loving service of the Lord and who constantly remembers Him at every step easily obtains the mercy of the Lord by entering into the personal contact. Such devotees do not need to seek an opportune moment to leave the present body. But those who are mixed devotees, allied with fruitive action or empirical philosophical speculation, require an opportune moment for quitting this body. For them, the opportune moments are stated in Bhagavad Gita, 8th chapter, 23 to 26th verses. But these opportune moments are not as important as once being a successful yogi who is able to quit his body as he likes. Such a yogi must be competent to control his senses by mind. The mind is easily conquered simply by engaging it at the lotus feet of the Lord. Gradually, by such service, all the senses becomes automatically engaged in the service of the Lord. That is the way of merging into the Supreme Absolute. Here, Prabhupada is again explaining, if for a yogi, right, it's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, if a yogi, in order to get liberated, one has to choose an appropriate moment to quit the body. If in a wrong time quits the body, he will not get liberated. He will come back into this material world. Whereas for a devotee who surrenders unto the Supreme Lord and follows the devotional process, devotional service, when one executes devotional service, pure devotion, not the mixed devotion, for that person, time and place doesn't matter. Because the Lord actually tells in Bhagavad Gita that for a person who surrenders unto me, I am this fifth deliverer. Krishna gives the promise that if you always think of me, if you always engage in my devotional service, if you always worship me, for sure you will attain me. Of this there is no doubt. So that is what Krishna is giving in Bhagavad Gita. We will continue to read the next verse. Therefore, thereafter, the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. Prabhupada explains in purport, the functions of the mind are thinking, feeling and willing. When the mind is materialistic or absorbed in material contact, it acts for material advancement of knowledge, destructively ending in discovery of nuclear weapons. But when the mind acts under spiritual urge, it acts wonderfully for going back home, back to Godhead, for life is complete bliss and eternity. Therefore, the mind has to be manipulated by good and unalloyed intelligence. Perfect intelligence is to render service unto the Lord. One should be intelligent enough to understand that living beings in all circumstances, a servant of the circumstances. Every living being is serving the dictates of desire, anger, lust, illusion, insanity and enviousness, all materially affected. But while executing such dictations of different temperaments, he is perpetually unhappy. Here Prabhupada is explaining, one should use the intelligence to execute devotional service of the Lord. It is mentioned in Upanishad, this body is considered like to be a chariot. This body is like a chariot. The five senses are like the five horses which is pulling the chariot. And the mind is considered to be the driving instrument, the rope. The intelligence is the driver. The conditioned living entity, the soul, is the passenger. If you want from one place to another place to go in a chariot, which is dragged by these 5 horses, who should be in control of the chariot? The intelligence. The driver should be in control. What is the driver? Driver is nothing but the intelligence. When somebody uses, there are 2 types of intelligence. One is the material intelligence. We also have this material intelligence, how to enjoy, how to make arrangements to enjoy. Purified intelligence. Prabhupada is telling here, right? Perfect intelligence, right? Therefore, the mind has to be manipulated by good and unalloyed intelligence. What is unalloyed intelligence? Unalloyed intelligence is that I am not this body. I am part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. I am the spirit soul. The purpose of me, the Jivatma, is to render devotional service unto the Paramatma. The purpose of the Jivatma is to serve the Paramatma. When somebody has such an intelligence, that intelligence is considered to be unalloyed intelligence, without any wavering, purified intelligence. When one actually feels this and turns his intelligence to inquiring about from the right sources, he gets information of the transcendental loving service of the Lord. When somebody is inquisitive, when somebody uses his purified intelligence to inquire into the higher truth of this life, for that person, Lord sends guidance in the form of a spiritual master, so that he can get the information about the spiritual world and the spiritual nature of the living entity. Instead of serving materially for the above mentioned different humors of the body, the living entity's intelligence then becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of materialistic temperament, and thus by unalloyed intelligence the mind is brought into the service of the Lord. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. In the spiritual plane, in the spiritual platform, there is no difference between the Lord and the devotional service to the Lord. That is why when we execute devotional service, the devotional service has the potency to purify our existence. The devotional service is like a fire which can burn all our previous both pious and sinful activities, karmas. The reactions to all our past activities, either it could be pious or sinful, both of them can be burnt by the fire of devotional service. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind are merged into the Lord, and thus the living entity does not remain a seer himself, but becomes seen by the Lord transcendentally. For such a person whose intelligence is purified, one who executes devotional service, one who dovetails all his desires to the will of the Lord, for that person there is no separate material existence. He doesn't see anything separate from the Lord. When somebody is purified, when somebody becomes purified in the heart, for that person, he will see everything in connection to the Lord. He will never see anything separate from the Lord. For example, for a purified person, this microphone will never be a material energy. You will see that this energy, even though it's material energy, it is meant to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This material energy, how we can use this microphone, an expert devotee knows how to engage the microphone in the service of the Lord, by using it to sing for kirtan or to give classes. An expert devotee knows how to dovetail his material propensities or material energy given to him in the service of the Lord. When the living entity is directly seen by the Lord dictates to him to act according to his desire. And when the living entity follows him perfectly, the living entity ceases to discharge any other duty for his illusory satisfaction. And here further Prabhupada is explaining, when somebody is very sincere in their effort to execute devotional service, the Lord sees the desire of the living entity, that he is trying to be sincere. For that person, the Lord guides the living entity according to his desires, the Lord's desires, so that the living entity can execute devotional service. In his pure unalloyed state, the living being attains the full stage of bliss. It is called Labdo Pashanti, and ceases all material hankerings. When somebody comes to that spiritual state, the highest purified state, he doesn't have any more hankering. That's what Krishna also tells in the Bhagavad Gita. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nachochati Nakankshati. When somebody comes to this Brahma Bhuta stage, what is that Brahma Bhuta stage? Seeing that everything is nothing but part and parcel of the Lord, everything is nothing but energy of the Lord, and everything is there for the pleasure of the Lord. Everything needs to be utilized for the service of the Lord. When somebody comes to that stage of Brahma Bhuta platform, he doesn't have any more hankering. Nasochati, nakankchati. He doesn't have any more hankering, he doesn't have any more lamentation. In that stage, he attains Mat Bhaktim Labate Param. When somebody comes to the Brahma Bhuta stage, he attains pure bhakti unto me. Pure loving devotional service. Prema bhakti unto me. I think we will read the next verse also. In the transcendental state of Labdo Pashanti, there is no supremacy of devastating time, which controls even the celestial demigods who are empowered to rule over mundane creatures. And what to speak of demigod themselves? Nor is there the mode of material goodness, nor passion, nor ignorance, nor even the false ego, nor the material causal ocean, nor the material nature. Purport: devastating time, which controls even the celestial demigods by its manifestations of past, present and future, does not act on the transcendental plane. The influence of the time is exhibited by the symptoms of birth, death, old age and disease, and these four principles of material conditions are present everywhere in any part of the material cosmos up to the planet of Brahmaloka, where the duration of life of the inhabitants appears to us to be fabulous. Here Prabhupada is explaining, one who is in this Brahmaloka, for example, the life of Brahma is like 311 trillion 40 billion years. 40 billion human years. 311 trillion 40 billion human years. Whereas our lifespan is like 100 years. If we compare this, our lifespan to Brahma's lifespan, it looks fabulous. It is not even imaginable. Somebody could say that, I don't accept. How is it possible for somebody to live 311 trillion 40 billion years? This is all some imagination. This is all some mythology. Actually, it is not mythology. I will give an analogy for us to realize this. You know, sometimes in India, right, during the rainy season, there is a type of fly. After the rain is over, in the evening, a type of fly comes into existence. You know what is the lifespan of that fly? It's in Tamil, it's called easel. I don't know the English name. The whole fly's lifespan is only half a day. It comes into existence in the evening after the rain, and then it procreates, it lives its life. By the time the morning sun comes, the fly dies. The whole lifespan of that fly is only half a day. That insect it lives for only half a day. To that insect, if somebody tells that human beings lives for 100 years, do you think that insect can comprehend this truth? The whole lifespan of that insect is only 12 hours. To that insect, somebody goes and tells there are some entities called human beings. They live up to 100 years. It can never comprehend. It is not possible for that insect to comprehend. It is thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times its own lifespan. Half a day of human beings is the entire lifespan of that insect. It can never comprehend. Similarly, for a human being, when we tell that Brahma lives for 311 trillion 40 billion years, we can never comprehend. How that insect is so insignificant for us. Similarly, for Brahma, we are so insignificant. So we can never comprehend how Brahma can live for 311 trillion 40 billion years. So when the scriptures explain that the lifespan of Brahma is like 311 trillion 40 billion years, it is very difficult for us to comprehend. It looks like fabulous. It looks like some mythology. But that is not so. Scriptures tell the truth. Scriptures reveal the knowledge, reveal the truth. Until somebody accepts the instructions, of the scriptures, the Yama and Niyama mentioned. When somebody practices under the bona fide spiritual master this process of yoga, one can never understand the whole existence. It is impossible. We will continue to read. Insurmountable time even brings about the death of Brahma. So what to speak of other demigods like Indra, Chandra, Surya, Vayu and Varuna. Even Brahma, after his 100 years of life, that is like 311 trillion 40 billion years, he has to leave his body. That 311 trillion 40 billion years is nothing but one breath of Mahavishnu. When Mahavishnu, right, breathes, exhales, all the material universe comes into existence. All the material universe comes into existence. In each one of the universe, there is one Brahmaji. That lifespan of the Brahmaji is 311 trillion 40 billion years. That 311 trillion 40 billion years is like one breathing time for Mahavishnu or Karanadayaki Vishnu. When he exhales, all the universes comes into existence. It stays for some time. When he inhales, all the universes wind up and goes into his body. That one breathing time of Mahavishnu is one lifetime of Brahma. That is 100 years of Brahma. That is calculated to be 311 trillion 40 billion human years. So in the grand scheme of things, we are so insignificant. In the grand scheme of things, we are so insignificant. Like how, the example I was giving, the insect which comes into existence during the rainy season, the whole lifespan is like 12 hours. That insect is such an insignificant thing for human beings. Similarly, for the devatas, for the demigods, especially for Brahma, we are so insignificant. And Brahmaji is like just one moment insignificant for Mahavishnu. So that Brahmaji, the greatest living entity in this universe, in this universe, he himself has to go through this process of birth, death, old age and disease. Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. Krishna tells in Bhagavad Gita, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. One who understands the perils of birth, death, old age and disease, he is situated in knowledge. Dukkha Dosha Anudarshanam. Dukkha means misery. Dosha means problem, fault. Anudarshanam means situated in knowledge. One who can understand birth, death, old age and disease are the one which causes sufferings in this world. The root cause of all the sufferings in this world. Actually, he is situated in knowledge that nobody can overcome in this material world, including Lord Brahma. What to speak of other demigods? Because Indra and Chandra, Vayu, Varuna, all the demigods, actually 14 Indras come and go in one day of Brahma. Brahma's one day, 14 Manus come and go, that means 14 times Indra, Chandra, Vayu, Varuna all change. So if Brahma himself has to go through the process of birth, death, old age, disease, what to speak of other demigods? And what to speak of the insignificant human beings? So everybody has to, all the way from the lowest ant to up to the topmost living being, Brahma, everybody has to go through this four principles of material conditions. That is birth, death, old age and disease. The astronomical influence directed by the different demigods over mundane creature is also conspicuous by its absence. In material existence, the living entities are afraid of satanic influence. But for a devotee on the transcendental plane, there is no such fear at all. The living entities change their material bodies in different shapes and forms under the influence of different modes of material nature. But in the transcendental state, the devotee is in Gunatita, or the above the material modes of goodness, passion and ignorance. Thus, the false ego of I am the Lord of all I survey, does not arise there. In the material world, the false ego of the living being trying to lord it over the material nature is something like the moths falling in a blazing fire. Right? Prabhupada is explaining further here. The propensity of the living entity to control this material nature, to lord over this material nature, is like a moth trying to access the light. When there is a fire, the moth comes around the fire and like all the time, thinking that that fire is going to give pleasure for me. The fire exists for me. The moth is not able to control the attraction towards the fire. It keeps flying, flying, flying. Eventually what happens to the moth? It gets sucked up into the fire and gets destroyed. Similarly, for a living entity, when he tries to lord over the material energy, which he cannot, because Krishna tells, this is very difficult. This material energy is very difficult to overcome. When somebody tries to control this material energy for their own enjoyment, it is not possible. Eventually, that person has to face the wrath of death. So, nobody can escape. Like this moth falling into the blazing fire. The moth is captivated by the glaring beauty of the fire. And when he comes to enjoy it, the blazing fire consumes him. In the transcendental state, the living being is pure in his consciousness, and as such, he has no false ego to lord it over the material nature. Rather, his pure consciousness directs him to surrender unto the Supreme Lord, as stated in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, 19th verse. Vasudevaga sarvamiti samahatma sudarlabhaka. Krishna tells actually in the 7th chapter, 19th verse. Bhagunam janmanam ante jnanavan mam prapadyante Vasudevaga sarvamiti samahatma sudarlabhaka. After a person goes through many lifetimes, when one comes to perfectional stage, he understands that Vasudevaga sarvamiti. He surrenders unto the Supreme Lord. Vasudeva is everything. Everything exists because of Vasudeva. Vasudeva sarvamiti. Such a soul is very rare. Samahatma sudurlabhaga. In this material world, we can see why not everybody is trying to the Supreme Lord. Why not trying to surrender unto the Supreme Lord? Because that is very rare. Krishna himself tells in Bhagavad Gita. All this indicates that in the transcendental state, there is neither material creation nor the causal motion for material nature. When somebody comes to this platform of Brahma Bodha platform, when somebody exists in the transcendental state by executing devotional service, for that person, birth, death, old age and disease does not affect. Because he knows that very clearly, I am not this body, I am spirit soul. The purpose of the spirit is to serve the Supreme Spirit. In that consciousness, one is not affected by the material energy. He is not affected by the time factor. He is not going through birth, death, old age, disease. Even though his body might go through, but he himself doesn't experience those miseries. So that is why it is mentioned in Rupa Goswami mentions this. That when somebody comes to that stage of executing devotional service, right, one becomes servant of the Lord, he is actually already liberated, Jivan Mukta. Yahayasya Harer Dasya. We will continue to read the purport. The above mentioned state of affairs is factual on the transcendental plane, but is factually revealed in a transcendental knowledge of the advanced state of pure consciousness. Such transcendentalists are two types, namely the impersonalists and the devotees. For the impersonalist, the ultimate goal or destination is the Brahma Jyoti or the spiritual sky. But for the devotees, the ultimate goal is the Vaikuntha planets. The devotees experience the above mentioned state of affairs by attainment of spiritual forms for activity in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. But for the impersonalist, because of his neglecting the association of the Lord, does not develop a spiritual body for spiritual activity, but remains a spiritual spark only, merged in effulgent spiritual rays of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord is full-fledged form of eternity, bliss and knowledge, but the formless Brahmajyoti is simply eternity and knowledge. The Vaikuntha planets are also forms of eternity, bliss and knowledge, and therefore the devotees of the Lord who are admitted into the abode of the Lord also gets bodies of eternity, bliss and knowledge. As such, there is no difference between one and another. The Lord's abode, name, fame, and entourage, etc. are of the same transcendental quality, and how this transcendental quality differs from the material world is explained herein with the verse. In the Bhagavad Gita, 3 principal subjects have been explained by Lord Sri Krishna, namely Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. But one can reach the Vaikuntha planets by the practice of Bhakti Yoga only. Krishna himself tells in the later chapters of Bhagavad Gita, only by Ananya Bhakti one can enter into the kingdom of God. Bhaktyat Ananya Yasakya. Only by Ananya Bhakti, pure unalloyed devotion, one can attain the Vaikuntha planets, not by Karma and Jnana. By Karma and Jnana, one can attain, the maximum one can attain is up to the Brahma Jyoti. In Brahma Jyoti, the 3 aspects of spiritual nature is not there. Only Sat and Chit is there. The Ananda does not exist in Brahma Jyoti. How? Ananda comes only, how do we derive pleasure in this material world? By rendering service. Right? Even in this material world, how do we derive pleasure? We derive happiness by serving. We are always serving somebody. I am serving my family, my children, my wife, my parents, my company. Right? Everybody is always serving something. That's how they derive pleasure. So similarly, because that is the nature of the living entity, is to serve the Supreme Lord. When we go to Brahma Jyoti, there is no service. Service means there has to be the object of service, and the service has to exist. 3 entities. The object being served, the servitor, and the service. 3 things has to exist. In the spiritual world, Vaikuntha planets, all the 3 exist. The Lord and the living entity and the loving service exist. Whereas in Brahma Jyoti, which is nothing but the effulgent rays coming out of the Lord, the sunshine, the Lord's bodily shine, that light, there is no spiritual body to render service unto the Lord. There the living entity stays as a small spark. Hence, it cannot experience bliss. So until one develops bhakti, pure devotion service unto the Lord, the prema bhakti unto the Lord, one cannot actually experience bliss. At most, one can experience is not suffering. There is a difference between happiness and not suffering. When somebody stops suffering, people generally think that is happiness. In this world, when we stop suffering, we think it is happiness. Actually, that is not. I give this example all the time. If there is a forest full of thorns, if one has to cross this forest, he needs a shoe. Unfortunately, this person does not have a shoe. Somebody gives a shoe for him. Unfortunately, that shoe happened to be of smaller size than his feet. But he doesn't have any choice to cross the forest. So he puts this uncomfortable tiny shoe and crosses this forest full of thorns. Shri Radha Neela Madhava Bhagavan ki jai. Shri Jagannath Baladev Mai ki jai. Subhadra Mai ki jai. Shri Sitaram Lakshman Bhagat Hanuman ki jai. Shri Gauranathai Bhagavan ki jai. So if this person wants to cross the forest, which is full of thorns, he needs the shoe. But the shoe is not fitting. But still, he puts on the shoe, which is very uncomfortable. He is trying to cross the forest. What will be his experience? It will be nothing but misery, suffering. Is the shoes? Have you tried ever walking with uncomfortable shoe? It's very, very painful. Right? After crossing this forest, if this person, after crossing all the thorns in the forest, he comes to the other side of the forest and there is a tree. He sits down under the tree and then he removes the shoe, which was very tight and uncomfortable. How will he feel? He will feel very relieved. Abba. Right? Is he experiencing happiness? No, actually he's just stopped suffering. So by going to Brahma Jyoti, what will happen to the living entity? He will just get stopped by material suffering. There is no more birth, death, old age, disease. Sat and Chit will be there. There is no Ananda. Ananda will come only when the living entity attains the devotional service and goes to the Vaikuntha planets. That's what Prabhupada is explaining. The Vaikuntha planets, right, are are also forms of eternity, bliss and knowledge, and therefore the devotees of the Lord who are admitted into the abode of the Lord also gets bodies of eternity, bliss and knowledge. As such, there is no difference between one another. The Lord's abode, name, fame, entourage are of the same transcendental quality, and how this transcendental quality differs from the material world is explained herein. Right? And then again, we will continue to read. Vaikuntha planets, by the practice of Bhakti Yoga only, one can reach. Only by Bhakti Yoga only one can attain the Vaikuntha planets. The other two, incompetent in helping one reach in Vaikuntha lokas. The karma and jnana is incompetent in helping the living entity to reach the Vaikuntha. Although they can, however, conveniently take one to the effulgent Brahmajyoti as described above. At most, karma and jnana can take one to Brahmajyoti. Only by bhakti, by developing unalloyed devotion, ananya bhakti unto the Supreme Lord, one can attain the Vaikuntha planets. Only in Vaikuntha planet, one can experience fully Sat, Chit, Ananda. In the Brahmajyoti, one can experience only Sat and Chit. There is no Ananda. Ananda is coming only by service. Only by rendering service unto the Lord, one can experience happiness, bliss. Hare Krishna, we will stop here. Any discussions? Any clarifications? Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, true. So in this material world, Prabhu the question is that in this material world also one can experience Satchit Ananda. When somebody is executing devotional service, he can experience Satchit Ananda. When somebody is not executing devotional service, one will have to experience Asat Achit Nirananda. Until somebody comes to the platform of devotional service, one cannot experience Satchit Ananda. Because when somebody is under the bodily concept, trying to satisfy the senses, that person is thinking that everything is for my enjoyment. He thinks that this material energy is permanent. That means he is affected by Asat. Because material energy is Asat. Until somebody comes to the spiritual platform, he cannot experience Sat. What is Sat? I am spirit soul. I am Sat. The Lord, Paramatma, is Sat. What is Chit? The consciousness of this. I am cognizant. I am conscious. Whereas the matter is not conscious. One can attain to these two stages. But in order to derive pleasure, one has to render devotional service. When a living entity comes to this path of pure bhakti, right, when he executes devotional service, even though he might be existing in the material world, even though he might have material body, even though he might be living in the material world, actually he is already liberated, Krishna tells. Rupa Goswami tells. He is already Jivan Mukta. He is already a liberated soul. Because his thoughts, his desires are non-different than the desires of the Lord. His desire is only to please the Lord. Harer Dasya. Harer Dasya means become servant of Lord Hari. Servant means whatever the master wants. He doesn't have any independent desire. When somebody executes the order and will of the Lord, somebody serves according to the desire of the Lord, he can experience Sat, Chit, Ananda in this material world. One doesn't have to go out of this material world to experience Sat, Chit, Ananda. But that is a very, very, very high standard. Only a pure devotee can experience. But when we are not that pure, still we can experience. When we do execute devotional service, still, even though devotional service is never Asat Achit Nirananda. Devotional service is always Satchit Ananda. Because Krishna is Satchit Ananda. And devotional service and the Lord are non-different. When we execute devotional service, even in the impure state, the pure devotional service when we execute, we temporarily, momentarily we experience Satchit Ananda. Because we are not completely pure, we fall down from that state. That is why When, for example, when Harilas Prabhu is singing Kirtan during Arati, right? Everybody is dancing. Everybody is experiencing at the time Ananda. But the moment we stop dancing, so many other thoughts comes into our mind. Moment we go to office, moment we go to home, so many other thoughts comes into mind. At the time we don't experience Ananda. We experience Nirananda, misery. So Satchitananda can be experienced in this material world, but it will be either temporary or permanent. For a pure devotee, it is permanent. For a practicing devotee, it can be temporary. When he execute the devotional service according to the instruction of the spiritual master, actually he can experience Satchitananda. When he doesn't execute devotional service, at the time he will fall down. He will be in Asat Achit Nirananda platform. Okay, Prabhu? Any other discussions? Prabhuji? Hare Krishna. Thank you. We'll stop here.